Just starting to come in.
Okay, yeah.
And the YouTube is just coming in, I think, and we are live on YouTube.
Cool.
Welcome, everybody. Hi, Neil. How are you doing?
Good. Good to be on YouTube. I don't think I've ever been on YouTube.
Really?
Nah.
First time for everything. So we are on Zoom. We've got all the participants here joining us on Zoom, and we are streaming simultaneously on YouTube. It is 5 p.m. here in Sydney, and it's a few hours earlier, I think, in Perth. What time is it for you, Neil?
Yeah, just after 2.
Ah, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I was really excited when you agreed to speak with us. I've known you for such a long time, and you are such a veteran of the webinars. Yeah, it's lovely to actually see you face to face.
Yeah, so I think I contacted you when your book came out, when your first book came out, because I was thinking about doing one. And so, yeah, I think that's where it started.
Yes, I know we've been in touch for such a long time. We were just comparing our books because I've got a copy of Neil's book, and Neil's got a copy of a few copies of mine, I think. And I think we might have written, yes. Oh, that's an old version.
Oh, yeah, I think this was the first one.
That's the first edition of that one.
Oh,
this is
I think it's the first
edition.
of both.
So I think we were both, we're both with the same publisher. And I think we might have recommended each other's books, which is great.
Yes. I've got your books on my website, and yeah, I usually
have you? Yes, and I think I've recommended yours as well. So I have just popped a link in the chat. So for those of you who are on Zoom, you should have also, if you've registered for this, you should have already received a copy of that link. So you'll be able to download those files, because this is going to be a really hands-on interactive session. So Neil is going to take us through some interactive exercises on named ranges, so you'll be able to follow along. So I've just popped the link in there, and I'm going to pop it in again just for those who've just joined us, and I'm going to pop it into YouTube in a moment.
Yep.
So everybody will be able to follow along. For those of you who are on Zoom, feel free to just put your comments in the chat, and we can talk about various things there. If you have particular questions, though, that you would like Neil to answer, just pop them in the Q&A at the bottom, and I will either ask Neil directly, or we'll do it at the end. So today is going to go for an hour. I'm going to introduce Neil, and then Neil is going to get started. I was just taking a look at Neil's bio, and I can tell how much he loves numbers, because it's all about the numbers. So let me read it to you. Neil Blackwood has written over 200 Excel articles. He has presented numerous training sessions for CPA. He's released over 20 Excel podcasts. He's presented over 300 public Excel webinars. His website has over 400 blog posts and 150 tips. And it's so wonderful to actually meet Neil, because I've listened to his voice so much. I've listened to his podcasts with CPA, and I've attended lots of his webinars. So it's just fantastic to have you here, Neil. So thank you so much.
No, it's great to get involved with these. That's good.
Great. I think we're just about full on Zoom, so I'll let you share your screen, Neil, and get started.
Okay. Let's do it. I'll get this, move this out of the way. There we go. So you can see the screen okay?
Yes, all good.
Okay, so let's dive in. If you do want to ask questions as we're going through, feel free to use the chat for, say, comments, anything you want to comment about. If you do have any specific questions, try and use the Q&A button. When you're sending them, you do need to click the send button with the Q&A. Also, make sure you actually specify who you want to send it to. You can send it to everybody. That way everyone sees the questions and the chats as well. So just check that out when you are sending them through.
Yes,
Danielle will
it's
monitor those, and you know, she will interrupt me if there's something that's you know, relevant to what we're discussing. Okay, range names. So on page 3 of the notes, and Danielle's put a link up to the notes in the chat screen there, and on page 3, there's a little formula at the top called structure equals flexibility. Now that's not intuitive, okay? Usually in Excel, you sort of think about structure as something that limits what you can do. But if you create the structure correctly, it actually allows you to be more flexible. And range names, I find, are part of that. Now, range names, they have a few different names actually. So in Excel, if we have a look at the formulas tab, Excel calls them defined names. So there's a section in the middle of formulas that we'll come back to. But technically, they are actually named formulas. So you actually create, and you'll see that as we get into the session. But basically, everyone calls them range names. And some people might call them named ranges. But they're all the same thing, and there's lots of different ways to use them. So I'll start off with the basics. So I am assuming that you don't know anything about range names, and then we'll progress through to get to some more advanced stuff by the end of the session. So here we go. We're going to give this cell a name. Now, you don't think twice about naming a sheet, naming a file. Well, you can name cells. So I'm going to name this cell, so cell C2, I'm going to give it a name of GST. So there's a little section that's on the left-hand side of the formula bar here. So you got the formula bar where you can edit your formulas. On the left of that, if you point to it, it actually comes up and tells you it's called the name box. Now, it normally has the cell reference like C2, but you can click inside there and you can create a name. So I'm going to go GST for cell C2. Now, really, really important, you must press enter. Okay, if you don't, then nothing happens really. If you click outside, it just forgets the name. So you must press enter when you're using the name box. Now, that name I can use throughout the file. So this whole file, I can use GST, and that's going to represent 10%, which is what's in cell C2. So let's see how we can use it in a formula. So let's say we've got this these yes and no's in column D, and we want to decide whether or not we're going to apply GST to those values based on this yes or Y or N. So we can do a very simple if function. So if that equals Y, comma, then we're going to do a calculation. We're going to multiply C5, and I've hit the times, and I'm going to click on cell C2, and look what happens when I do. Excel puts the name in there for me. So it gives me the name. I don't have to type it, but it puts it there for me. Then I'll just go comma 0 and close the bracket. So if there's a Y there, I want to work out the GST. If it's not, I just want 0. Now, the beauty of this is I can just copy that down. Okay, so the advantage there is I don't have to worry about dollar signs. So normally that would have to be, you know, $2 to get a fixed, or like a mixed reference, so I could copy it down. But because I've used the range name, it just copies, when you copy it down, it just still refers to GST, which is cell C.
Neil, can I just ask a question about the nomenclature? Because we're, as financial modelers, there's a few questions about the structure and best practice. And someone's asked whether we should call it GST, or what are your thoughts about using something like RNG GST?
Yeah, I'm totally happy with using a structured names, and in my advanced session, I typically do use structure in the names. For the beginners session, I'm happy just to use names that are descriptive, but more than happy to have RNG in front of it, and I actually do use that in a lot of my models. Also, and I tend to use TBL for my formatted tables, which we'll see a bit later. But totally happy with putting a prefix in front of the range name to identify it as a range name. You could just use R. So you could have just lowercase r GST as well. But whatever you're using, as long as you're consistent with it, then that's the important thing. Okay. So that's GST. As I said, I can use, if I start typing it, by the way, Excel does help me. So as I've started typing equals GST, it actually pops up just like a formula, a function, if you like. And then I can just hit the tab and it will put it in. When I hit enter, I get the 0.1, which is 10%. By the way, something a lot of people don't realize, you can actually do that calculation without the if function. So I'll show you how to do it. I'll just tweak it a bit. Okay, there we go. So we're on page, I've got to go through a bit. We're on page 6 of the notes. I'll go through a couple of things in the first few pages after I've shown you this. So when you're using something that's going to zero something, so we're either going to charge GST or we're not. And so you can actually get rid of the if statement and use what's called a logical test. So we're checking if something equals y, if D5 equals y. Now this, you do need to enclose the logical test in brackets to get this to work, by the way. And when you multiply the brackets, this basically converts the true and the false into a 1 or a 0. So true equals 1, false equals 0. And so this will also create the same calculation. Basically, it will give you the same result without the if function. And you can sort of see it working if we go here. If you want to see what part of a function or part of a formula looks like, or the result, you can select it and then press the F9 function key. And there you can see true. But when you multiply by it, that true gets converted to a 1. Ones and zeros, it's Boolean, binary, whichever way you want to look at it. And the ones and zeros, if you want to zero something, then this works really well. Multiplying by false will zero something, which will be in the second one here. So if I select between the brackets, F9, false. Now, if I select this part of the formula, it's actually going to come back 0 because it's multiplying false by a number. And there you can see the 0 coming in. So that's just a little trick you can do to avoid using the if function.
Very cool.
Now, I should go through some of the rules before we dive straight in. There are some rules for range names. They can't be a cell reference. So let's say we had this weird rule in Australia that we had maybe had 2 GST rates. Let's say we had GST1 and GST2. Well, if we tried to name this cell GST1 and we hit enter, something weird happens. Okay, you actually go to the cell reference. Now, remember, we've got 16 odd thousand columns now in Excel. So pretty much every 3-letter word followed by a number is a cell reference. So GST1 is a cell reference. So you have to be careful. Like if you wanted cat1 for category or something like that, then you can't use it. You can use the underscore character though. Can't use spaces either. So no spaces allowed. But just be careful. Yeah, so you can't use a cell reference. By the way, to get back to the A1, always just control home and that gets you back there. You can actually use that to navigate around. If you know where a cell is, you can type the cell in here. So if you wanted to go to A10,000, you can actually type the reference in the name box and it'll take you there. So that's part of the reason why you can't create a name that represents a cell reference as well, because it would confuse Excel. So control home and we're back. You can't start with a number. You can start with the underscore character, but you can't start with a number for a range name. Excel won't let you create a illegal name, so don't worry about it. If you try and create it, it'll just stop you. So just be aware of that. A couple of examples that I've put in the notes on page 4 there. Now, I've got some suggestions as well. First suggestion, always use at least one uppercase character. And the reason is this: when you start typing, so if I type GS at the moment and hit enter, I'll get a name error because there is no GS at the moment. But if I put the T on the end, now I used all uppercase characters in this one. As soon as I hit enter, then that range name is capitalized, just like the sum function. If you type sum in lowercase, it gets recognized. Well, the same thing with range names. So if you use at least one uppercase character, you know you've spelt it right if it gets converted when you're typing it. Okay, so highly recommend that. Also, if you're using like a double barrel name or something like tax rate, it's a good idea to use a capital letter for the first word. I don't know why, but it just makes it easier to read. So I've got some examples in the notes for there as well. So it's called camel case, where you capitalize the first letter of each word, basically. So I recommend doing that as well. And as sort of mentioned earlier, I do recommend prefixes, using them for range and also suffixes. So you can have something at the front of the name or something at the end of the name. And I use that for things like month and year to date, also forecasts and budgets. I tend to have a prefix for budget and forecast, and then a suffix for month or year to date, which is a common thing that you might do. There is a dedicated keyboard shortcut, F3. So function key F3 is dedicated to range names. So if you press it, you actually get a list of all your range names, which we've only got one at the moment. We're going to have more by the end of the session, don't worry. So function key F3 allows you to insert the range names pretty much anywhere in Excel. We'll get to some dialogues later on, and you'll see just pressing F3 will give you a listing of all of the range names. Speaking of that, the name box, which is in the middle of the formula ribbon, this also lists all the range names, and it tells you where they're linked to. It will show you the formula that's there, shows you the value at the moment, the current value. So we'll come back to this as we go through. That's the name manager in the middle of the formulas tab on the ribbon there. Okay. That's all good. That was a single cell. Now, as I mentioned, that cell GST I can use throughout the file. I can go into any sheet and type in GST there, and I'll get my 0.1 or my 10%. So it's really useful for like values that don't change, they can change, but just use them throughout your model. Okay, so that was a cell. So we named the cell. Now I'm going to name the range. So cell B3 down to B8. That's the range. I'm going to click in my formula, my name box, and I'm going to call that income with a capital I. So you just type it in and always, always, always press enter. And then I'm going to select the range across the top here. So C2 across to H2. Select that range, click in the name box. And I'm going to call that just super, S-U-P-E-R, superannuation in Australia. So I'm going to call that super and hit enter. So that's the preliminary work that you need to do. Once you've done that, you can create your formula. So here we go, equals income. I start typing INC. Nothing else starts with INC in the functions that are there. So I can just hit my tab key. I use my tab key a lot when I'm creating formulas. Times, and then super, S-U-P. And as you can see, there's nothing else that starts with S-U-P. So I can just hit my tab key. There we go, income times super. Ooh, almost makes sense. One of the things with range names is the formulas that you can create are almost self-documenting. Now, I'm going to hit enter. So I'm in the latest version of Excel, and so I have dynamic arrays. Dynamic arrays work very seamlessly with range names. So there's a new word that we need to get in the dictionary. It's called automagical. Okay, so this is going to be automagical when I hit enter. It automatically populates the range. Okay, now if you're in an older version, you'll just end up with one single formula in that cell. But because I'm in the dynamic array era, it's actually copied the formula all the way down as far as the income name and all the way across as far as the super name. And all of these cells have the same formula in them. Now, I don't want to go into dynamic arrays here because we don't have time, but suffice to say that this cell here is actually empty of formulas. There's nothing in here as a formula. There's a value there, but it's grayed out in the formula bar up the top here. When I click on the top left cell, that's the formula that was created, and that's the one you amend. So if, for example, I wanted to times by 2, for whatever reason, when I hit enter, that adjustment is going to flow through to all of the other entries. Okay.
An auto magical thing takes a little bit of getting used to, doesn't it?
So that's the cell that you edit. You don't edit any. If I actually put something in one of these other cells, I will actually break it. I'll get what's called the spill error. Okay, so as I said, I don't want to get into dynamic arrays too much because that's sort of a separate topic. We will look at it, we will come back to it. But in general, dynamic arrays work seamlessly with range names. So now, how do they work? When you're working with a range, it's a little bit more complicated than working with a single cell. So if I type in equals super, again, this is going to what's called spill across. Okay, so that's all of those percentages that are there. So just using the name spills it. Now, if you don't want it to spill, you have to use the @ symbol. Now, if you're in the older versions of Excel, you won't have to use the @ symbol. It'll just be there. It'll just stop. It doesn't copy across. So put them in the @ symbol in front of the range name works like the old days, if you like. And then you can copy it across. Now, if I copy it too far, I get the range, hang on. I'm going to switch. My mouse started acting up this morning and I'll switch mice. There we go. I get the value error. Now, horizontal names like these are used commonly in things like budgets, financial models, forecasts. And the really good thing about it is once you've defined the limits, if you try and use the name outside the limit, you'll get the value error. So it works on the other side as well. So if I try and use that name here, I get a value error. Now that's really good because that's Excel telling you you've stepped outside your structure. So you've created a name, but then you've tried to use it in a column that it doesn't belong in. Now, the theory is in column C throughout this file, if I use super, I'm going to get 9.25. Now, that's a little bit different with dynamic arrays because they try and help. And so let's say I go here and go equals super. It actually starts from the beginning, which this is a little bit confusing. If I use the @ symbol, that's a little bit more as it should be used with 9.25 in column C. And then if we widen that, you'll get the 9.5 going across. So whilst dynamic arrays work really well on the same sheet, they're not so special on other sheets in terms of, I said, financial models, because typically in a financial model, you try and keep all of your columns consistent. So for example, July might always be in column E, or wherever you put July, that's usually a consistent column throughout your model. And so that should work okay. But the fact that dynamic arrays can actually work against your structure, that can be a little bit of a problematic side. You've got to make sure you are using the in the right columns, basically. But as I said, if you do use it outside, then it does give you, where did I go? There we go. It does give you the value error. So that's a warning that you're using the range name outside. Now, if you did extend it, so let's say we extend that name, you can go to the name manager, super, and let's go across to column I. Okay, so you can just edit it And when you close, then everything's good. Notice that this formula automatically copied across. So if I put a value in there, it'll automatically update. One downside of dynamic arrays at the moment is they don't copy formulas. So even though this automatically extended, there's no, sorry, formats. There's no formats in that range that it just popped up there. So that's a downside. Hopefully it's something that will get fixed in the future. Now, it's a little bit clunky to use the name box for creating all your names. So there is an automated way to create your range names. And so I'll show you how you can do that. So what I'm going to do is select the range. This is on the Create Names sheet. I'm on page 9 of the notes. I'm selecting cell B3 down to C4. Column B has the names that I want to create. So cell C3 is going to be named adjustment underscore factor. So remember, you can't have a space in a name. So what Excel does, if it finds a space in a label, it will replace it with the underscore character. And so this label, if you like, is going to become the range name for cell C3. And the same with inflation PA. You can use the full stop, by the way. So the full stops will remain, but the space will get replaced by the underscore character. So having selected that range, click in the Formulas tab, and there's something called Create from Selection. Now, I don't use that button because I use the keyboard shortcut, Control, Shift, and the F3. Remember, the F3 is the function key dedicated to range names. So Control, Shift, F3 automatically creates the names. So I'm going to click on that. Now, it guesses where the names are. It says create names from values in the left column. It got it right. 9 times out of 10, it will get it right, but there is the odd time that it might select both of these. So you do need to check this before you click OK. But that's what I'm going to do. Click OK. And so now, something I haven't shown you yet, there's a drop down on the name box. So when I click the drop down, there is adjustment factor. There's GST, there's income, there's the inflation, and there's super. So you can actually navigate around your file using range names. And I actually use range names for hyperlinks as well. And so you can go directly to something using the range name. There's some advantages with using a range name for a hyperlink. It gets around some of the issues when things are deleted. There is a way to create an unbreakable hyperlink as well using a range name. If I've got time, I might show it to you. But if I want to go to GST, that takes me there directly. And if you press, I think if you press F5 enter, that takes you back. When you use range names to navigate around or hyperlinks, if you press F5 and then press enter, it takes you back to where you were when you followed the link. Okay, so we created 2 names. So, and when you click on them, by the way, you can widen this. My formula bar is a little bit larger than the standard because I do so much training. I basically increase the font size there. So hopefully you can see that fairly clearly. But you can make the name box bigger. Just these 3 dots, you can just drag that so that you can see the names. Okay. We'll create another list this time. I'm going to create a vertical list of names. So I'm selecting C11 down to C16. These are the costs. So I'm going to use Control Shift F3. Top row, got it right again. Going well, click OK. And 2 more names here that automated. So I'm going to create an inflation calculation. And also we've got num days, which is number of days in the month. I've selected the range C8 all the way across to 09. Again, Control Shift F3. Left column is what's ticked. That's all good. So they're the names that will be created. I'll create the last one manually because I do need to divide by the total number of days. And I'll explain what I'm going to do in a minute. And so cell P9 is going to be TO, I'll just do TOT days, standing for total days. The use of abbreviations is up to you. I tend to abbreviate up to a point. You need to use abbreviations that are easily understandable, and be careful using like abbreviations that might not be well known. Something like GST is well known in Australia, but if you're using abbreviations that are not well known throughout your company, for example, then it can be worth maybe making the words a bit longer. Press enter. There we go. Now let's see what we're going to do. We're going to create an inflation factor in row 8. Now, I'm not saying this is the best way to handle inflation or anything like that. It's just a calculation that's going to slowly inflate the costs as the year progresses. So let's create it. Equals inflation PA. So the row we're on is actually inflation. Well, we're going to use inflation PA to do to calculate how much. Actually, I'll start with a 1. I better read my instructions. Okay, there we go. We're on page 10 of the notes. Equals or plus. I start a lot of my functions with plus. You can start formulas with the plus sign. It's easier to hit than the equal sign. That's why I tend to do it, because I've got a full-size keyboard here. So +1 plus, get rid of that percentage, don't need that. Open bracket, inflation PA divided by 12 times. Now, I typically use helper cells whenever I'm working in our wonderful financial year, where July is the first month and June is the 12th month. So I've got a helper cell in row 6. That's just the month number. Now, as I said, I am not saying this is the best way to handle inflation, but it's one way. So what we're going to do is basically slowly increase the inflation rate as the year progresses, so that by the time we get to June, we will have the 4%. So in 1 year's time, or from July, it will have inflated 4%. So it's just a gradual increase of costs as the year progresses, and we're going to use that in our calculation. Okay, let's build the final formula. So we're going to allocate the costs based on days in the month. So a bit like depreciation, if you like. We're going to use the number of days divided by the total number of days multiplied by the costs. So let's do it. Now, when we finish, there will not be a $sign in sight, okay? So in terms of the formula, we're not going to have to fix anything. So here we go. Equals costs times num days divided by tot days times inflation times adjustment factor. I didn't explain the adjustment factor. The adjustment factor is the thing that you use when your boss comes to you and says, oh, we need to drop costs by 2%. So you just change the adjustment factor to 98%, and that does the adjustment factor for you.
Can I just say that is a really good idea in financial models, to add something like an adjustment factor. It's going to save so much time later on. Absolutely.
Yep. Now the magic happens when I hit enter. Okay, so again, because this is I'm in the dynamic array version of Excel, it looks at all those things and it does all the work for me. So after I've hit enter, it's actually populated all of those cells in that range to basically marry up with all of the ranges that I've used. So one formula to rule them all, if you like. So the formula at the end is exactly the same as the formula at the start. Whereas if you were using cell references, it's going to be totally different. It's going to, the row number is going to change, the column number is going to change. You've always got that feeling, has that been copied across correctly? But with range names, it's identical. And with dynamic arrays, you don't even have to copy it. It populates it for you. So, and it's documenting itself. Costs times the number of days divided by the total days times inflation times an adjustment factor. It's done. It's telling you what the calculation is. So I'm a big proponent for range names, especially in things like financial models and budgets and forecasts. Okay, so that's the using the create from selection shortcut. So you can create names really quickly based on labels. So for example, you could sort of create individual names here for say cost 1, cost 2. That makes it a little bit harder to do the copying. So creating a vertical name here made that a lot easier. So it's a combination of a vertical name for costs, and then we had inflation going across and the days per month going across as well. But the fact that you don't have to worry about where you're putting the dollar signs as well is a good thing. Now, drop-down lists. We're going to create a couple of drop-down lists based on these. I might actually only create one. I want to show you a couple of things with what's called a formatted table. We'll use another formatted table in a minute. Formatted tables and range names work really well together. I tend to use names in conjunction with formatted tables to get ranges that automatically expand, which is something that everyone wants. Oh, by the way, before we dive in, if you want to get a list of all your range names in a file, the easy way to do it is press the magic F3 button, and there's an option here called Paste List. And that will give you a list of all the range names in the file, as well as the reference that it relates to.
Hang on a minute. Hang on a sec. Just hang on a second. Has that always been there?
Yeah, that goes back to about Excel 95.
That is so cool. I can't believe I didn't know that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So F3 and then paste list. Now the downside is it's not dynamic, so it is something you need to get yourself to do at the end of a day when you've been developing your file, is just to
I can't believe I never saw that. It's been there the whole time. How helpful.
And so yeah, so that gives you the listing, it gives you the reference, and so it's really good for documentation purposes. Okay. Now let's create this formatted table. I'm going to show you a little bit more like a bigger formatted table, but we're just going to do a single formatted table. We'll use the cities as the example here. So now again, when I'm creating my files, I always have pretty much a table for lists and sometimes a sheet for lists and a sheet for tables. And I always separate them with a blank column. The reason is it makes it so much easier to select it. So if I use Control A, that selects that whole table in one go. It works this one here as well. Control A, putting a blank column between the tables just makes selecting them so much easier. So I'm going to create a table for this list. So as long as you're anywhere in that table, click on Home and click on Format as Table. Now, unfortunately, people think this is a formatting thing, and this doesn't help because you've got all these wonderful colors here. Let's go purple. Now, I'm going to click OK. Most 99 times out of 100, you should have this box ticked. My table has headers. Click OK. And so there's our pretty colors. And the beauty of this is as you add to the list, spelled Darwin, right? It automatically expands. Okay, so that's a formatted table. Let's create a drop down. I'll make these both cities. Actually, I want to show you. I want to show you two ways of doing this. The first way is just to select the range. So here's a shortcut to open up the data validation drop down. Alt A V V in sequence. So you press Alt, you press A, then you press V for Victor twice. Alt-A-V-V, and that opens up this, and you can change it to a list. You can click on the source, and you can just select the range there. Now, I did read that you can type in the table reference here, but I can't get it to work. You have to select the range itself. So in this case, C2 to C6. Remember, I did add Darwin to it, so it's longer than what was originally there. So you click OK. So there's the drop down. And the beauty of it is you can go back here, and who have I missed? Let's go Hobart. Okay, so we've got another name on the list. And if we go back to the drop down, there's Hobart. Okay, so it automatically expands.
Yes, I love this one. I think I learned this off you a few years ago, Neil, on one of your webinars.
It might have been Win. I think Win Hopkins was.
Oh, it might have been Win.
Yeah, showing this. I have my reservations about it, because when you go back and have a look, it's still got, it's like it's a range, but it's not. Because that range is in a formatted table, it automatically expands. It's tricky to know it's going to expand because there's nothing in here that says it's a formatted table. You have to actually look at it on the sheet to realize it is a formatted table. If it used the table references, it would be a lot better, but it doesn't yet. I think it's coming. I think something is coming to actually put the table reference in here. I'll explain what the table reference is a little bit later in the next example. Okay, now here's what I tend to do. I'll select this name, select that range. You'll see it's got table 1 here. If you click on, when you select a formatted table, you get a bonus ribbon called table design, and there's the name. So you can actually give it a descriptive name. It gives it a default name. I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to select the range here. So I'm not including the heading. And I'm going to call that cities. And okay, let's call it RNG cities. There we go. So RNG cities. So it goes away because it's got a table as well. But I can go back here and I'll create the same drop down. And I'll use, and this is where I can press my F3 key. There's my RNG cities that I just created. Click OK. Now that also works, and just as dynamically. So if I go back here, I'm going to run out of cities. Who have I missed? I've done Brisbane. Okay. Okay, so when we go back, they'll both have Brisbane in there as well. I prefer using a range name, mainly because you can use that name anywhere in the file as well. So for example, if I go equals, actually, no, I'll show you an example of a dynamic array version. But that's another reason to use range names, is it sort of makes it a bit clearer that it is a range that's going to expand because it's using the formatted table underneath it, if you like. And there is a downside with formatted tables. So I'm going to create a formatted table here. Home, formatted table. I'll just use the defaults. Oh, no, I'll pick a color. I'll go orange. Here's the downside of formatted tables in terms of they've got something called a structured reference. So here we go. Let's have a look at how it works. So equals sum if S. Let's say I want to add up the price. Here's the structured reference. Table 2 price. So that's what I'm adding up. And I'm going to look in part number, comma, and that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that's $2.56, which is that one. Now, here's the problem with this. These are structured references. You get the table name, and then after that, within square brackets, you get the column name. So it's a really good way of referring to it. Here's the downside with these structured references. And this is what you can't use in that the data validation. That's what I'd prefer to see in data validation, not the cell references, but this structured reference. Now, here's the downside. If I copy this across, let's have a look at what's happened. When you click on here, notice that now we're adding up the weight. We're looking in the price column and we're using H1. H1's okay because that's what I want. But when you drag one of these references across using the fill handle, it works like a relative reference. Now, sometimes that may work for you, but most times it doesn't. So the way to do it is to copy it, copy it, and then paste it. And that works, okay?
It's a strange thing, isn't it?
It's a strange thing. It's only that fill handle that causes the problem. If you use copy paste, it works okay. So here's what I do. So I'm going to call that, I'll just call that range part, and I'll call this range price, RNG price. Whoop. I'll get it right in a minute. RNG price. There we go. Now I can use that. So that's RNG price, and that's RNG part. And I can copy that across. Okay, so when you define the column as a range name, it doesn't change as you copy it across. So you create the formatted table, which gives you all the advantages with using formatted tables, but then you can name the columns using a range name. And that gets around the copy issue. So you can copy across without having to worry about the relative reference issue of copying a formatted table across. So that's what I tend to do, is that I tend to use range names for all of the columns within a formatted table, especially obviously the large data ones that you're working with.
It's quite a lot sometimes.
Okay. Paste names, that's all good, did that one. Now let's have some fun with dynamic arrays. Okay, so I've got a list of states on the left-hand side here. I'll zoom in a bit. I'm
glad you got all the states this time. There were a few missing last time.
I'll change. I got 2 Victorias, okay? So what I'm going to show you is the unique function. Equals unique. Okay, so I'm going to select this range.
Oh no, hang on, you are still missing some.
No, I have missing some yet. Okay, so I've got 2 Victorias. So the unique function is a dynamic array function. It's brand new. It's in the subscription version of Excel. It only lists items once. It basically removes duplicates. That's more accurately what it does. It has an option to only show unique entries as well, but I won't get into that. So entries that are only in there once. Mr. Excel gets really bent out of shape about that one. But in this case, this just lists all of the states that are there. Now, watch what I can do with the drop-down list. Alt-A-V-V. It's a list. I'm going to refer to the first cell. It's actually the top cell, and I haven't shown you this yet. Now, it might be hard to see on the screen. I'm using the hash symbol. So $C, $2, and the hash symbol. And what that does, that refers to the whole of the dynamic array. So that whole list of unique states. So when I go, okay, now the drop down is based on this list. So there, and let's say I change Victoria to Tassie. So now I've got Tassie there as well. And that will automatically get updated. And if you want to get fancy, you can put a sort at the front. This is also another dynamic array function. So you can go sort, and that changes the list into alphabetical order. And you can also go reverse alphabetical order as well if you want. In this case, this is now it's in alphabetical order. So when it lists, it's in alpha order, and WA is always at the end. I'm from WA, so I tend to go reverse alphabetical order. But that is one way to do it. Another way is to create a range name. So let's do that. So I'm going to click in that cell. I'm going to use formulas, define name. I'll call it new states because that's what's in the notes. If I'll spell it right, new states. And again, what I'm going to do is put that hash on the end of the $C $2. And that again will give me a dynamic range that the range name is referring to. Okay, so I can go here, I can go anywhere and go equals new states. And when I hit enter, I'll get that same listing, in this case, a sorted listing, because I use the sort on the unique. That can be really handy if you want to have the same sequence in your file. So maybe you always list your states in alphabetical order. And so in all of your models, you always want them in the same order. And so that's one easy way to get that happening or working. It'll also work as a drop down. So if I put a drop down here, Alt-A, VV, on a list, press my magic F3 key, new states, click OK, OK again. And so this one will give me the same list as well. So New South Wales through to WA. Okay, that's there, that's there. And we'll finish up with some fun you can have with the name box, okay? So here we go. In Excel, there are, let's see, offset, index, XLOOKUP. They're functions that can refer to a reference, which means that you can use them in formulas on either side of the colon to refer to a range. So the best way to show you that is to show you how this works. So I've got an offset function in column E. The formula in column E is in column F. I use the formula text function. So that shows you what's in column E. And so the offset function here is starting at A1. It goes down 2 rows and it goes across 1 column to the right. So that's what the offset function does. You can start at a point, it's like the anchor cell. You can move a certain number of rows and a certain number of columns. I won't get into the argument about whether you should use offset. I tend to use index instead of an offset, but this can refer to a range. So you can actually, a cell reference. So you can use it, for example, you could put a colon here and then put something else on the other side of the colon and you'll get a range to work with. I'll escape out of that. Let's say you wanted to figure out how this got or where this is coming from. What you can do is copy the offset in the formula bar. So Control C, press escape and paste it in the name box. So I've just used Control V to paste it in the name box. So this is going to show you the cell that the 200 is coming from when you hit enter. There you go. It takes you to cell B3. So that's what this particular cell is, or where the 200 is coming from. Same with this one here. You can do the same with index. Control C, press escape, click in the name box, Control V, press enter. And that's the New South Wales. That's where the index. And even XLOOKUP will let you do it. So XLOOKUP can refer to a reference, which is really powerful. And that's coming from the 200 there. This one's a dynamic array. So this actually lists the 3 entries there. So when we select this, copy, whoop, click there. Don't want that one. That shows you that it's 3 cells that it's actually returning for the index. Another way to do that, by the way, is select the range. This is another way to do this, pretty much the same thing. Press the F5 function key and then just press enter. And that also takes you there. The downside is you're actually editing the formula. So you want to make sure you press edit. So it's sort of converted the the formula into the cell reference, in this case B3, which is not what you want. So you do need to press escape. Okay, so I don't use that one a lot. I tend to use the copy paste, but you can use the F5 function key to sort of get a similar result. I mentioned earlier about typing a cell reference in, so you can go directly to, C1000. It'll take you directly there. You can also go A1, and that'll take you back to A1 as well, instead of hitting Control Home. So it's pretty much the same thing. But if you know the cell, or roughly the cell where you want to go to, you can just type it in the name box. It'll take you there. It'll even do it with you can put a sheet name in there. Just put the exclamation mark there. So this will take me to lists A1. And so that will take you directly there, and press F5, then press enter, and that will take you back. F5 enter is a really useful way to get back at things. Also, if you use macros, if you type a macro name in here, it'll take you to where the macro is. There's one I didn't know until I tried it earlier this year. Late last year. So if you type a macro name into the name box, it'll take you to, in the VBA window, where the macro is. So there you go. So you can't use a range name that's a macro name either for that reason. So, okay, I think I made it to the end. I usually go over time, so I'm really proud of myself.
Well done. We have 4 minutes, so some very quick questions if anybody's got any. So I think we've managed to address all of the questions as we go. We just have a couple minutes if anybody has any particular questions. I think the majority of some of the questions that we didn't really address was about, we've kind of assumed that you should use named ranges. I know some financial modelers are not a huge fan of named ranges. Is there any reason from your perspective, Neil, is there any situation when you wouldn't use a named range?
Not really. If you've got a file that's big enough, like it is a file that you're going to be using for a while, like if it's a year after year file, it's definitely worth using range names. If it's a small file, it's just like a throwaway file, I wouldn't worry about it. But if it is a file that does need structure, if you use range names correctly, they can sort of add that structure. And financial models, budgets, forecasts, those types of things, I think are ideal for using range names.
Marina would like to know what version of Excel you're using.
I've just got the latest subscription version. I don't think, like, there are people who have that insider program. I'm not on that. I've just got the normal update, 6 monthly or monthly. I think I'm on monthly cycle. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're probably same as me. Don't do the insider because then you have stuff that not everybody else has. So you better to just see what everybody have the same feature.
That's right. I'm scared of the insiders.
No, it's cool to have. I did it when I was writing my books, but yeah, it's better to just have the same as everyone else. All right. Okay, well, we might leave it there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and particular thank you to Neil. That was fantastic. I am going to see all of you next week. We are heading to Brisbane to hear from the CPA virtual discussion group from Thomas Paul, who's going to be talking about advanced error notifications in Excel. So was there anything you'd like to leave us with, Neil, before we sign off?
No, thanks for the opportunity. I hope I've convinced some people that range names are good. I don't know. We should have maybe done a poll and had a vote beginning and end, but we'll see how we go. Maybe they can let me know on my email. So my email's at the front of the file there. So, and if you do have any questions, feel free to send them through. Always happy to answer via email.
Great. I will send a link to your future webinars and a few other things in the follow-up email.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Neil.